Hello, welcome. Welcome to the last section of the Research and Distance Education Conference this afternoon, or well, it depends on your time zone, but and I know we've got people dialing in from all over the world, which is quite exciting. So welcome here. In our invited talk section, what we're aiming to do is to bring industry leaders and key sector bodies to talk to us about their expectations and their plans in relation to online and distance education. Yesterday, we had John Baldwin from JISC, who shared with us some of the ideas around student experience and their expectations in distance education within the UK HE sector. Today, we've had some absolutely fabulous sessions on although not the keynote, because of course I was presenting the keynote, so I'm not saying that I was absolutely fabulous, but we had some really interesting discussions around assessment and redesigning assessment. Tomorrow is our Rethinking Learning and Teaching Day. And so that's why I'm really delighted that we've got both of our speakers this afternoon who are going to talk to us and I think give us some opportunities to really engage with some ideas around learning and teaching and the future. So I'm really delighted now that we've got Betty Vandenbosch, who is Chief Content Officer at Coursera. And we've also got University of London's own Director of Online Education, Sam Brenton. So Betty is going to give us a lovely session or a lovely talk on preparing for the new normal, the promise of online learning. I think it's quite an exciting title, actually. So Betty is Chief Content Officer at Coursera, where she oversees the company's content and credential strategy and partner relations. And the University of London is a substantial partner with Coursera, which we're very proud of. Before joining Coursera, Betty was Chancellor of Purdue University Global, an institution resulting from Purdue University's 2018 acquisition of Kaplan University. At Purdue, she oversaw academics for more than 32,000 students, most of whom earned their degrees online. Before that, Betty held a number of leadership positions at Kaplan University and served as Associate Dean and Associate Professor at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. Throughout her career, she has won several awards in teaching and research, and she earned her PhD in Management Information Systems and an MB from Western University in Ontario, Canada. So, over to you, Betty, if I may.
Thank you very much. That was much more of an introduction, I think, than anyone needed. So I'd like to get right to it, if that's okay. There we go. So preparing for the new normal. You know, COVID really changed a lot. And we all know this. We know that our lives were disrupted. Education has changed completely, not completely for the better, but from all of that, we've learned to live in different ways. And I think it's really important for us as educators to think about what this means and how we should move forward, taking the good, hopefully discarding the very bad, and really taking what we can from what we learned over the course of the last, for many of us, 15, 16 months. So COVID entered a new era of higher education. In the UK, folks didn't feel prepared, and you weren't alone. Nobody in the world could possibly have been prepared for this. But your students and students around the globe said, well, this isn't so bad. I kind of like online learning in spite of all the challenges. So what's incumbent upon us as educators is to figure out, what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about the fact that we didn't feel like it was a great situation? We didn't feel like we gave our best. And students say, yeah, it wasn't the best, but we still want to do this. Well, I believe, and I think many of us do, that digital lectures are going to be the new textbooks. 75% of students indicate that they'd like to continue to learn with video lectures. Now, as a former teacher, it kind of hurts me because I feel like the synergy that comes from a real live experience, the fact that there's a bit of serendipity, that you can change track mid-class, all of that has benefits. However, I think often what we do in lectures is we're sages on the stage and we don't offer those benefits, and students are responding to that. So we have to find the best of both worlds. The benefits that we all know come from synergistic learning, and the reality that not all of what we present is exactly that. So the landscape overall is changing. Here are the 4 things I'd like to talk about today. Blended teaching, as I just kind of alluded to, is going to grow. Students are prioritizing employment. Now, this is not just because of COVID, but COVID has exacerbated their need to find careers that are stable and will continue. Hopefully there will never be another pandemic, but should there be, should something else drastic happen, a lot of folks really said, wow, I wasn't prepared and my career was not resilient. Students are much more interested in affordability than they have been historically, and that's partly because education is getting more and more expensive. And we have, as educators and administrators, a responsibility to really support faculty development. Folks are participating, we have to make sure that we're helping them in the best way possible. So first, what's going on with blended learning? I'd like to look at KL University, a Category 1 institution in India with about 18,000 students. The university wanted to help students prepare for successful careers, as all universities do, and an honors distinction was really important to enable that. But because of transportation and scheduling and everything else, few students could come to campus. So KL University uses content from Coursera for blended learning and offers credit for some standalone courses taken on Coursera that count towards an honors credential. So faculty are using digital tools to improve the student experience alongside the Coursera courses. Active learning, flipped learning, innovative evaluation mechanisms, formative assessments. I think most of you have heard of this and are probably going to talk about it more tomorrow. Giving students the flexibility to learn online, the number of students who took honors programs has doubled. 81% of those students took more than 4 courses on Coursera, and students have completed on Coursera more than 100,000 courses. So this is a kind of an unusual thing, and it worked. It enabled these students to learn in ways that they couldn't if they had been limited to going to campus. And of course, we all know the devastation that COVID has wreaked on India in the last few months. It's only becoming more important. Another university offers flexible job-relevant learning. Here, it's a story of Szeged, a campus in Hungary with about 21,000 students who wanted to do more to help their students for work. They began with access to the popular course on Coursera, Learning How to Learn. They offered that to their students. And then they rolled out Coursera for Campus. So students can take courses on Coursera, some for credit, some as extra credit. And what's happened is students are taking these courses in order to learn more about their jobs, the things that they want to do next. It's not all for credit, but it's for skill building. Faculty members are excited about delivering their own content on Coursera, which is also possible. But the point here is some of it is online, some of it is on campus, but together it's enabling students to learn things they wouldn't have been able to learn if it had just been a campus-based program and had just been limited to the faculty of these 2 institutions. So that's what's going on with blended learning from Coursera's perspective. What about prioritizing student employment? This one is kind of challenging because automation and COVID resulted in lots and lots of trouble for people who needed jobs. When I look at these numbers, it's heart-wrenching. 85 million jobs. core skills are changing forever. And it's our responsibility as educators to help people and prepare them so that the double disruption will not wreak havoc on their entire job lives. It's only a temporary sort of hiatus, I suppose, for many of these folks. So as we all know, new jobs are going to be digital jobs. And it's incumbent upon us to help people learn digital skills. But what if somebody worked in hospitality and that job is gone for now, maybe not forever, but certainly gone for now and will change? What should they do? Well, one thing that happened is female STEM increased. So I am a woman, I am a STEM woman, and I'm so proud of the fact that even though women in employment is dropping faster than men's employment because of COVID, women have turned to online learning. The Coursera Global Skills Report found that the share of course enrollments from women in the UK grew from 34 to 42% in 2020. Now, when I did my STEM learning a long time ago, I was often the only person in class that was female. It was lonely. And to see this and to see something good coming out of COVID just really makes me very, very happy. Now, how do we make sure this continues on? Of course, more female instructors, course material for inclusiveness, machine learning interventions, features to support diversity, all those things that help for underrepresented minorities also help for women, because in many programs they are underrepresented. So women are turning to STEM online in ways that they've never turned to STEM before. One of the ways that they're doing this, and that we can also be sure that we are teaching digital skills that enable people to get jobs, is through university and industry collaborations. One that we're very proud of is the Google IT Support Certificate. So Google IT Support is a certificate. It's an entry-level certificate that students can take, takes 6 months about, and at the end of it, they have sufficient knowledge to take an entry-level position in IT. Now, as we all know, just having the skills of the job is not necessarily enough to get a job. So these are the folks that we're helping. 500,000 enrollments, people who don't have college degrees, people who identify as minority, people who aren't earning a lot of money. These are the people that need jobs, and yet how can we help them get those jobs? Because often they're not prepared in terms of their academic credentials, but they're also not prepared in terms of their work capabilities. So Google and we have partnered in the United States with many organizations that help people get to work. That leads to career pathways. With Google and we have more than 130 hiring partners who are helping these folks get introductory positions in their organizations. But perhaps the most exciting for me and for the University of London certainly is that there are also degree pathways. The University of London bachelor's degree in computer science enables students to take their Google IT Support Certificate and articulate it into the computer science degree, meaning that these students don't have to relearn things that they've already learned. Sometimes students do that directly, and sometimes they do it through a career pathway. They get a job and then they finish their education, which is terrific, because of course we all know that a degree is still really, really important for most skills. But at the same time, people have to work, and this provides that perfect combination. Here's an example. Blair Curry is one of 3,000 students in the Bachelor's of Science at the University of London. He earned a degree in liberal arts, but he couldn't get a job. He completed this IT support certificate and got a job. That gave him confidence and gave him the impetus to get another degree, one in a field that was more likely for him to get a job. And within a year, he secured a tech internship. This is the kind of story that Coursera talks about all the time. Learning first, and then moving that learning into something that will give you strong lifelong prospects. So we have to build for affordability. Folks like Blair need to be able to pay for their education. Online degrees, as you can already tell, reach a new type of learner. They're older, they're employed, and they come from all over the world. How can we help them? The average student loan debt among UK borrowers is £40,000. Somebody who's more than 30 years old is probably, and doesn't have a degree, is probably hard pressed to pay that kind of money. And certainly people from around the globe who also deserve to learn, and who deserve to learn from the best universities across the globe, also can't pay £40,000. The other thing that's important is that we have to move from traditional degrees to next generation degrees. Full-time in person to online, monolithic to stackable. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Synchronous, we've talked about, to dynamic, expensive to affordable, access to a few, access to many. This stuff is pretty basic, but the last one is not. Admission based on past success rather than admission based on proven potential. What's interesting here, and we have a few examples on our platform, is that sometimes when people are 18, 19, 17, they really mess up. Really mess up. I could talk about my son, but this is not the time for that. Then they grow up and they say, oh my goodness, I blew it. And they can't get into a great program because they blew it when they were kids. If you can afford to think about them as who they are today rather than who they were when they were 17, and can figure out a way to provide admission based on potential, those students, those potential learners, can become much more successful adults. How do we do that at Coursera? Open, stackable content. There's curriculum that anybody can take. You don't have to be admitted, and there's degree curriculum. If you can think about the curriculum as something that you can do in an open format and then transfer into a degree, you've got something already. That will lessen the cost, and also people only have to learn once. The other thing that it does for our partners and for anyone who has stackable credentials is it enables universities to author once and offer that information, that course, in multiple settings. The other thing that it does is it enables universities, admissions folks, to evaluate the quality of the learners today. They learn something in the open environment, and if they succeed, they can move to a degree. The University of Illinois in the United States has done stackable work in a really, really positive way. They wanted to extend the reach of GE's programs, but of course their MBA is the most important program in their university, in the business school, and they couldn't afford to say to people, well, you can come into the MBA and we'll see how you do. So what they did is they launched in last year a degree called the IMSM, which is a one-year program. Anybody can join the one-year program as long as they've got an undergraduate degree, not high bars, and then they can go from that into the IMBA. But all the credits transfer. As you go backwards, there are courses that GE's has on the Coursera platform. You can see them here on the left-hand side of the right-hand side. Those are all open courses, and they lead to certificates. And those certificates guarantee that students know how to learn on Coursera and know how to learn, regardless of what they did when they were kids. Those certificates then stack into the degrees, and many more students end up being successful. The other thing that I think is really important here is to remember that when you're in your late 20s, early 30s, and you don't have a degree, you often feel like you failed. And you've got real lack of conviction, and you can't be committed because you don't know if you can do it, and you're scared. By doing this one step at a time, you build self-confidence, you build self-efficacy. Of course, people can learn. Of course, they can do this. And that slow build enables them to be much more committed to their education and also much more committed to their degrees. So online learning officers are intending to convert. They're planning to do this. How are we going to make that happen? Hands-on projects, programming assignments, programming courses. These are the things that we have seen help. But online education is not just about moving things over. We at Coursera created a Drivers of Quality in Online Learning report that was based on years and years of data from nearly 200 million course enrollments. And this is what we found. I don't think that these things, I'm going to let you read them for a sec. I don't think that they're, oh my gosh, I would never have thought of that. But I do think that it's important to remember that each one of these initiatives will help students be more successful in your online courses. And it's really important to make sure that they stay connected. As you can see, all of this helps more through connection. Hands-on projects, in-browser experiences, short lectures with in-video questions to keep people awake and interested, and discussion forums are the 5 things that we saw made the most difference. And that's it. Those are my thoughts. Access to online education creates more equal opportunity. And we at Coursera, and I personally believe that more equal opportunity creates a more just world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you very much, Betty. That was absolutely brilliant. There are a few questions coming in, if I might share those with you. Is mobility between institutions part of the stackable degree journey? How is prior learning accredited when students move to another institution mid-degree? So it's about transferability of qualifications. And actually the other question that I'm looking at as well on here also addresses this question of parity and transferability between universities.
So we are thinking about this hard, and lots of folks are. I'm most familiar with the system in the United States, and there I have to say that it's appalling how much relearning our learners have to do when they transfer universities. And it's really the receiving institution that has to say, I will accept this credit. But as we all know, there's a real not invented here challenge in much of higher education. And if they didn't learn it at my institution, how can I be sure they know it? We at Coursera are doing what we can to provide guideposts to the quality of the education that's on our platform. We're looking for ACE, which is an American organization accreditation, ACE credit recommendation, which means that an independent body has said, we believe that this piece of learning, this piece of content will be worth approximately this number of credits at most universities. Our Google IT certificate, which the University of London incorporates into their bachelor's, is something with ACE accreditation. But also there has to be a commitment on the part of institutions to say, yes, I know that I have been part of the problem and that I should accept credit from other institutions. Any of you who are interested in talking about this, we are currently in the midst of a discovery to see whether or not we can help further enable degree pathways on our Coursera platform. So I'd love to engage with you if there's anyone who'd like to talk about that. Perhaps somebody could put I'm sure that you've all got my email address. That's not that hard. Betty@coursera.org. So away you go.
Thanks very much, Betty. I'm sure people will take you up on that. I mean, there's a couple of responses there from colleagues sort of talking about status and competition, because of course, if you're only going to pay for half of your degree at my institution by bringing half in from another institution, there's questions of economics there. But really good discussion. Thank you. There's a question or a comment I'd like to raise here. Universities in the Global South need to become partners in the online environment. What is Coursera doing and has experience to create collaboration between Northern universities and the Global South?
So one thing that we're doing, I illustrated with KL University. Many more universities in the Global South are participating in Coursera for Campus than in the northern tier. And what we're doing is ensuring that folks around the globe have access to the learning on Coursera, which is, I think everybody knows, universities on Coursera are really tier 1 top universities around the globe. We only have about 165 universities and every single one of them is excellent. So that's one way that we're helping. Another thing that we do, we have a thing we call Coursera Conference that runs every spring, and we invite people from around the globe who are interacting with the Coursera platform. So our partners, as well as our Coursera for Campus customers, can come together to talk about issues and to see how they can work more closely together. The third thing that we are just embarking on is conversations with our partners about others that they would like to engage in, and figuring out whether there's something like turnkey courses, turnkey degrees that we might engage in, but that's not as far along yet.
Thanks, that's really helpful actually. I've got a comment here about from a colleague. When thinking of reshaping the content as well as how we teach, and I think this is picking up on your points within the presentation about employability being so crucial in the future that we face, learner needs are central. And the colleague is asking how, when we're in research focused universities such as the Russell Group universities in the UK, industry alignment and employability doesn't tend to necessarily to be the forefront of the academic agenda. So it does create challenge in embedding those type of teaching models. Have you had any experience within Coursera of supporting institutions to tackle embedding employability?
So this one, I'm just going to open the kimono here. I was at a Research One institution for 15 years, and I didn't worry that much about employability when I was there either. Then I went to an institution that cared almost exclusively about employability. And I do feel that there's a path between. So what we believe is the best way forward on Coursera is a collaboration between our industry partners and our universities. The Google IT certificate, but there's more. There are ways for faculty at our universities to look for projects, to look for labs, things that are very hands-on, and you can get them on the Coursera platform and use them to give your students the skills that they need. I recognize that many of you are focused on your research, and please don't stop. It's your research that found the vaccine, and that vaccine has changed my life. So please do not stop doing research. At the same time, our learners need help, and I think it's a collaboration between industry and universities. Now, when I was at an R1 university, we kind of did this to our industry. We kind of said, oh, what do they know? They don't know about learning. They don't know about this. They don't know about that. We don't want to teach people for a job. We just want to teach them so that they can be lifelong learners. Laudable, but not practical. And I encourage people to find a middle ground and use the supports that industry and the content on Coursera to help move your students forward without distracting you from your main job, which is research.
Thank you. I think we'll have to stop there for the moment, if that's okay. There are a couple more questions to look at, but I'd like to invite Sam to do his presentation, if he might, in a moment. And then perhaps we can open up for further discussion. But first of all, Betty, thank you very much. That was really, really stimulating. Thank you. So Sam Brenton is our Director of Online Education and a tremendous record of engagement in online and distance education and technology enhanced learning. So it's a great pleasure to have Sam here and part of the RIDE conference. Sam, I'm going to hand over to you, if I may.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. It's great to be here today amongst friends, talking together about this thing that we do, and to share a platform with Betty, who's a close friend to the university and is doing such wonderful work with Coursera. I'm going to start with some reflections from my own experience in my own career, and then focus on an example, and then sound a note of caution, and then end with an appeal. I was thinking about how to approach this talk, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how slippery the topic is and how much one could say. And also what happened, which I wasn't quite expecting, is that it invoked a torrent of memories in me from when I first started working in HE in the late 90s, and I came across the debates about learning theory and education for the first time. I remembered the argument I had at one of the first ever M25 Learning Technology Group meetings with an esteemed colleague, where he argued that academics in the disciplines had to learn the language of online learning theory. And I argued that we had to learn the language of the disciplines in order to collaborate effectively. And I remembered early online learning conferences where we got very excited that the hyperlink would render linear education obsolete. And we wrote papers about the network of the web being isomorphic to the networked way in which our brains actually learn. And then when early social media came along, it was going to be Twitter, etc., that ended long form linear education once and for all, and good riddance to all that. Now, we may look back on some of that early breathlessness with a kind of fond embarrassment, but it's still with us today, actually, in new forms. See the JISC Education 4.0 promotional material, for example, with students wearing VR headsets, but using them to watch PowerPoint slideshows. Now, working in an educational development department in the early 2000s, there was a sense that we, the progressives, the constructivists, the modernizers, simply did know truths about how students learn. And we were pitched against the unreformed disciplines who did not. And the reverse was true too. The disciplines saw us as those education people with our flashcards and our action learning sets and our transferable skills and our language about metacognition and so forth. And they thought us very odd. And there was a kind of peculiar ire and ferocity about this standoff. Well, it's the HE version of ferocity, which really consists of tense committee meetings over stewed coffee and sandwiches that go stale after 30 minutes. This was after an era when we still had sandwich lunches in university meetings, and you rarely needed to eat at home in those days. I remember 4-hour teaching and learning committees with vast fruit platters, but I digress somewhat. And I remembered a formative occasion in my own development when I was assessing the portfolio submission of a young lecturer who'd been through our probationary postgraduate certificate in academic practice. And he'd come over from Germany. Maths was his discipline. And his reflective commentary included a rebuttal of the learning to learn doctrine, as he perceived it, in defense of knowledge and coverage in his discipline, and his training in the Teutonic tradition of higher learning, and what he thought that meant for how he taught the subject to his students. Now, he was very surprised when his submission passed, and he really thought that he'd be upbraided for going against the trend of the Educational Development Department's dominant theory, which he felt had been uncritically foisted upon him during the course. And I thought back then that there's something going on here. You know, a young academic who'd come to UK higher education really thought that he'd be marked down for reflecting authentically on his approach to teaching in the discipline. Now, I too, young and not long in the game, felt a certain weight of expectation to judge him negatively, to disapprove of the practices he was defending. Now, I didn't, because it was an evidence-based reflection, but the fact that the assessor and the assessed felt a certain anxiety, a certain sense that we were both rebelling, tells me something intangible, but something that's certainly there about the conditions under which we were both operating. And there was back then an us and them feeling. The enlightened ed devs versus the oldie worldy chalkboardists, progressives versus Luddites, constructivists versus behaviorists. And somewhere in the mix, there was a sense of political ideology too. Or rather, I think ideological stresses in society were being played out in shadow form in the subgenre of educational development. And so you had these strangely heated rows about chalkboards versus overhead projectors and so on. Again, lots of stewed coffee and angry sandwiches. And then the internet, with all its democratizing early utopian promise, was plonked into the middle of this and assumed different shapes depending on your position. And I think there's a version of this going on today. Today, when the world has moved online out of necessity, including education. And today, when the internet, more than anywhere else, is where our ideological tussles are played out explicitly and in shadow forms. And I worry sometimes that pedagogy for online education is starting to assume some aspects of those shadow forms of that ideological tussle. And I think we need to be careful. Anyway, those are just some of the memories that came to me when I was thinking about this subject, and as I was trying to think about how to discuss it usefully, because there's so much that one could talk about. And I thought that one way into the topic is to use as an illustration and example par excellence, that form of teaching which always seems to be at the center of this debate. That form of teaching that attracts opprobrium and ire and angry sandwich eating like no other. That form of teaching that's persisted in the English language for 800 years, first as a term for a written work, and then to mean an oral discourse on a given subject for instructional purposes. That form of teaching that's still used as a job title, so central is it to the dominant mode of instruction still. I speak, of course, of the lecture. And the lecture is a useful example to use, I think, because this talk is not a position statement to situate myself at either end of the continuum between constructivism, behaviorism, social learning, direct instruction, independent, guided learning, student-centered, teacher-centered approaches, or learning design versus instructional design. And indeed, more or less everyone seems to be lined up against the traditional format lecture. The social constructivists, the behaviorists, if you can find any these days, the direct instruction people, the cognitive load and memory retrieval and dual coding fans. Everyone's lined up against the lecture, except, of course, and here's the rub, except for most students, and except for most teachers, and except for most university administrations around the world. The introduction of Rethinking University Teaching, 1993, first edition by Diana Laurillard, which is the closest thing that we have in the UK to a foundational text on online education, talks in the introduction about the wretched experience of lectures as a student and then as a young teacher. And so the lecture is a counterpoint for the new forms made possible by the web and developed through, in that case, through her conversational framework, which is still very influential today. especially in the UK in the form of the ABC approach to online learning course design developed at UCL, which I can say from experience is a really, really useful tool. In the same year, 1993, in the US, Alison King coined a phrase when she advocated that we move from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. And it's stuck in the culture as a shorthand for active versus passive learning. She wrote, "The professor is the central figure, the sage on the stage, the one who has the knowledge and transmits that knowledge to the students. This assumes that the student's brain is like an empty container into which the professor pours knowledge. In this form of teaching and learning, in this view of teaching and learning, students are passive learners rather than active ones." And just last year, the new Vice-Chancellor of Leeds University said to the Times Higher that the 45-minute lecture is so outdated, it's pedagogically not sound. And if you put that kind of delivery online, it's even worse than when you do it in a lecture theatre. There are many other examples of why the traditional lecture is not suitable anymore that you could find. And so the promise is that the internet is the form which will finally kill off the lecture which serves as the non plus ultra of old world teaching forms, that embodiment of transmission of the sage on the stage, of expert to novice, of meat space timetabling, of Fordist production line models of education, of the sausage factory of the chalkboard, the slide deck, of hierarchies, a conservative, unexamined form. Now, I'm not going to launch into a defense of the lecture here. This talk is not that talk. This talk is about advocating for open minds, and there are many passionate defenses of the lecture format out there. But I'll just say two things. One about disciplinary traditions, and one about long form as an underserved format in online education. When we look at how the subject of law is taught at undergraduate level and what a law lecture looks like, your typical law lecture will actually model the discourse of that discipline, sustaining an argument over time, simplifying complexity, holding attention, telling stories, persuasion, rhetoric. It's actually really interesting that much law teaching is actually on the almost unfashionable now in lecture, readings, seminar model. And in that lecture, there are real fireworks. In that seminar, there are real fireworks teed up by the lecture and the readings. The fireworks happen in the seminar. It's really rock and roll. You get cross-examinations, critiques, role play. And I had the great pleasure of working with some law faculty last year to help them get ready for the pivot to online. And it turns out that that model can be transposed online, not directly as is, but it can be transposed online rather effectively if you're prepared to slay a few sacred cows. So the lecture model is not necessarily passive. It depends how you do it as a teacher and what you do with it as a student. Then there's the question of length. Now, which Betty actually even referred to in her presentation just now. There were a number of excellent studies in the early days of MOOCs and on into the present day that showed that students' attention wandered after a few minutes. And so the rule of thumb now is that videos should be no longer than 6 minutes long, or 10, as in the case of the presentation that Betty just gave us. Well, that's absolutely fine, and it can work really well. Look, we've made 50-something MOOCs on Coursera, and they're great. We love them. We've reached millions of people. And how extraordinary it is to be able to say that in passing, as though it's as natural as breathing. How different things are to how they were before, and how much better they are. But here's a thought experiment. If Netflix found that people's attentions wandered 6 minutes into their shows, would they make shorter shows? Or would they strive to make shows that kept attention more effectively? It's the latter, clearly, and we see elsewhere in online culture a tendency towards greater and greater length, actually, counterintuitively. The golden age of TV gives us long, long stories, multi-hour documentaries. And of course, the media form, perhaps the educational form, which has really, really broken through into the culture in the last few years, is the humble podcast. And I might argue that the lecture has actually found its perfect modern form in the podcast. It's lo-fi, accessible technology. You can do it on your phone. It's cheap, it's mobile. You don't even need PowerPoint, and it's hugely popular. Now, we've heard about the importance of learning activities in this conference and elsewhere, and I'm not arguing for lectures and against activities. Indeed, I've recently changed our production processes to put learning design and activity design at the heart of it. But I am cautioning against the notion that some forms are intrinsically educationally valuable and some forms are not. That some forms and some kinds of learning, the lecture, listening, reading, remembering, knowledge, are of a lower order than others, activities, peer collaboration, skills. Now, this talk's approaching its conclusion, so I'm going to come out and define what I see as the key features of the current soft consensus that's developed around the pedagogy of online learning in higher education. And it has these features. It advocates for social constructivist principles about learning, for activities and collaboration over transmission and content, for peer learning over independent learning, for the decentering of the lecturer, for meta learning, so learning to learn criticality above coverage or subject knowledge, for learning design over instructional design. It tends to be largely generic about what makes successful learning and does not foreground disciplinary pedagogic traditions. It advocates that proper online learning is asynchronous and distinct from the emergency remote lecturing of the pandemic, that engagement is an end in itself and not a means. It treats formal learning as a distinct kind of learning to informal learning. And at times, there's a kind of activism about it. Now, some of this may have real utility. I like some of it and practice some of it. But there is place for both, is there not? There is a danger that we become puritanical, which is never good. There's no perfect online course. All education is a messy negotiation between human beings who have different pictures of reality in their heads. And students will always learn in myriad, unintended, and unsanctioned ways. And I've got to say, whatever we do, they're all watching YouTube, or now they're watching great video lectures on Coursera, and that's all to the good too. There's a danger that we slip into truisms, into reductive positions such as active learning, yay, passive learning, boo, or indeed the opposite. When in fact, there's a lot to examine and question, even in those terms. One of the talks yesterday alluded to a clash of pedagogies between students and program teams being both the subject academics and the course designers, because they work in partnership. In that example, the clash arises when you ask a cohort of students how they learn and what they most value, and they give the, quotes, wrong answer. They say, we like the content. And we think they should say, we like the activities and the peer collaboration, because we say that the literature says that that's how active learning happens. A fascinating talk, which I really welcome, fascinating subject. There is a danger here. And I think the danger is that we end up saying students are right, except when they're wrong. And if the students are wrong, it's because the subject academic and the course designers haven't taught them how to be right, how to learn properly. So by implication, they're wrong too. We know how learning happens and they don't. And suddenly we're back again in that educational development department at the turn of the millennium. And we don't want to be stuck back there. These positions about active learning are not uncontested in the literature. It's not written in stone that merely remembering, merely listening, writing, reading, mere knowledge, mere understanding are lower order skills. There's much debate about this, and it predates the internet. It's fascinating, and we should temper, I think, and examine our certainties, particularly when students are telling us to in the data. The danger in all of this is that we get a kind of homogeneity in the online education that we produce, and that counterintuitively we stop listening to what our students are telling us and what subject experts are telling us. So certain are we that we are right. And we overlook a long alternative history of learning theory that can actually help us. Now, in closing, I'm fortunate enough to have the best job in the world. I get to develop online programs in a range of disciplines, working with fantastic academic colleagues, and we get to choose together how we want to do it. So I'd like us to experiment with long form. I want to try a philosophy course, which is based purely on podcasts, readings, and discussions. I'd like to bring the pedagogy of teaching law into the digital age without fitting the subject into a generic template. I want social learning and direct instruction where appropriate, and actually they're perfectly compatible, I find. And I want to look outside the walls of higher education practice to look afresh at how people in the wider world are learning online, because the defining feature of the last generation is that there's been a revolution in learning fueled by the web. Most of all, I'm wary of this sense of us and them. Us and the subject academics, the true pedagogues and the hordes of emergency response lecturers, us and the students, active learning and passive learning, the guides on the side versus the stage on the sages on the stage, open versus closed, progressive versus conservative. Every now and then a technology comes along that gives us new possibilities for learning, whether it's the invention of writing, the printing press, the postal service, TV, the microchip, or in our age, the web. And it always changes the world. It's tremendously exciting to be working together on these things at this time in history. We're still only just starting in online learning. We have much to draw on and much to invent. So let's invent together and do so with open minds and without certainty, with a frontier spirit, because there's so much still to discover. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sam. Excellent. We would welcome questions or comments. Marianne Taylor has given us a response here. Experiment on long form, wary of us and them. Thank you. So she's very impressed with that, and links it to her memories of Ormond Simpson's presentations at RIDE, I think, on the learning machine. So thank you very much. Are there other comments and questions that folks want to put in? And also, Betty, if you're still with us, it would be lovely to hear your thoughts on Sam's input.
I'd love to say what I heard and what I think. Sam, congratulations. You have provided such a strong counterpoint to the received wisdom that I presented. And I think it's absolutely important for us to do point, counterpoint, to and fro, think about how different ways of learning can be incorporated into this new world of online. I often think that we are too rigid and too puritanical in the way that we put things together. And yet, you know, when you've got something that works, you're afraid to move away from it. And what I'd love to do is experiment together to see if we can't try some longer form, can't try something that's a little bit different than we've ever tried before. I'm just feeling very strong and powerful with this conversation and the work that we're going to be able to do together to see what works and what doesn't. And I'm confident some of your stuff is going to be a disaster, just so you know, because it always is. I think the thing that is the most important for all of us to remember is that while we're academics, we are not performers. And Netflix is not great because it's 2 hours long. It's great because we're watching performances. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Thanks very much, Betty. We've got a comment from colleagues. what COVID has shown us is that collaboration to address inequity is essential. Where is the space for that within our educational system? Sam, would you like to respond to that initially? Because I know, Betty, you've already picked up on the issue of inequality to some extent within your input.
Yes, certainly. Look, the other reason why I think my job is the best job in the world is because I'm able to work at the University of London, where access is our core mission. You know, we have 50,000 students studying at a distance with us all around the world. We are here to open up access to education. That's what we do. And we partner with great organizations like Coursera, who also have exactly the same mission. And education in itself is the #1 thing to transform people's lives around the world, regardless of background, culture, age, everything else. So I think everything we do really is oriented towards exactly that, to addressing exactly that, the inequalities that we find around the world, however they come about. That may be a bit utopian, but can I also say, can I just slip in a response to Betty's response, which is that I don't think at all that she was presenting received wisdom. And actually, you know, Coursera has been one of the prime innovators in higher education of the last few years. We've learned an immense amount through working with Coursera and the students that we meet through Coursera. And part of what I was saying, I think, was informed by an awareness of the multiplicity of pedagogies that are out there. You know, we talk rightly about decolonizing the curriculum. And I wonder whether we also need to think about decolonizing our pedagogy, because we have students from everywhere with so many rich educational backgrounds, and we can learn an awful lot from that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. And in fact, we've got a colleague from Palestine who joined a CDE short course recently, Hala, and she's absolutely raising that question about, are you interested in learning about the experience in Palestine? And in fact, we are due to put together some presentations and some discussions with colleagues there. So I think that this dialogue can continue. And we do, as you say, Sam, have that opportunity to work with students across the globe on both our Coursera platform and through our other provision, and work with institutions across the globe through our Recognised Teaching Centre network. And I know there are lots of colleagues from those teaching centres with us. I think, sadly, we probably have to finish about now. Tomorrow is more focus on rethinking learning and teaching, and I think that Betty and Sam have fantastically coordinated to get us, what did David say yesterday, to get us fizzing, to get us really thinking about this, because there is much more to discuss and much more to do, and that is a very exciting place to be. So I'm going to have to stop there, and thank you very much to colleagues who've input questions. We'll make sure that we try and get those captured and some responses in our reporting for the event. So thank you. Thanks very much, Betty and Sam, for your input today, and Emma, who helped in the background, and Andrew, who has run the live sessions for us, along with Mark and Isabel. It's been a great afternoon. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning with more discussion and I hope some real chances to make us all question and think. Thank you very much.